My cousin Sayed. My job was worthless. Guess who became her boss last month? Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. The burgundy carpet in my aunt's living room had seen better decades, but it was the stage for what would become the defining moment of my early career. March 18th, 2017. I remember the date because I wrote it in my journal that night, along with a promise I wasn't sure I could keep. Emma's engagement party was one of those obligatory family gatherings where success is measured in salary figures and job titles, where conversations feel like informal performance reviews conducted by people who barely know you. The house was full of relatives I saw twice a year, each armed with the kind of casual cruelty that comes wrapped in concern. I was nursing a plastic cup of wine that tasted like it cost exactly as much as it probably did when Emma found me by the bookshelf, studying the spines of novels that looked like they'd never been opened. "Alex, there you are." She approached with that particular smile she'd perfected, the one that looked warm from a distance but felt cold up close. "I've been telling everyone about your little computer hobby. The word hit like a paper cut, small but precisely placed to cause maximum irritation. "It's not a hobby, Em. It's my job. UI/UX design at TechStart Solutions." Right. She waved her hand dismissively, the engagement ring catching the light from the cheap chandelier. "But what do you actually do there? Like, day to day?" I should have known this was a setup. Emma had always been a prosecutor disguised as a cousin, skilled at asking questions that sounded innocent, but were designed to expose what she perceived as weaknesses. I design user interfaces for mobile applications, research user behavior, create wireframes, test prototypes. So you make apps look pretty. This came from Brad, her fiancé, who had materialized beside her with the confidence of someone whose greatest professional achievement was an MBA from a school whose reputation exceeded his actual capabilities. That's like being a digital interior decorator, right? The conversation was attracting an audience now. Uncle Mike paused his discussion about real estate investments. Aunt Sarah looked over from her debate about private school tuition rates. My mother, bless her, was across the room, but I could see her watching with the expression she wore when she was preparing to defend me, but wasn't quite sure how. "It's more complex than that," I said, keeping my voice level. "We study how people interact with technology, identify pain points in their experience, then design solutions that make software more intuitive and effective. It's part psychology, part business strategy, part—" "But Alex," Emma interrupted, her voice taking on that patronizing tone she'd mastered in business school. "When are you going to get a real job? I mean, don't get me wrong, it sounds fun and all, but you're 24. Shouldn't you be thinking about actual career growth? Financial stability?" The room had gone quiet except for the gentle hum of whatever cooking show was playing on the TV in the kitchen. I felt the weight of 12 pairs of eyes, each carrying their own judgment, their own assumptions about what constituted a real career. "I make $45,000 a year," I said, immediately regretting sharing the number. It sounded smaller when spoken aloud, especially in a room where Brad probably spent that much on his car payments. Emma's eyebrows rose in what might have been surprise or pity. It was hard to tell. 45? Honey, my signing bonus at Goldman was more than that, and that was just the bonus. She wasn't lying. Emma had graduated from Wharton the previous year and walked straight into an analyst position at Goldman Sachs. She'd made sure everyone in the family knew about her starting salary, 85,000 plus bonuses that could double that figure in a good year. In 2017, for a 25-year-old, that was serious money. "But that's not just about the money," I started, though even as I said it, I knew how it sounded. How it would be interpreted by people who measured success primarily in financial terms. "Of course it's about money, Alex." Emma's voice carried the certainty of someone who'd spent 2 years in business school, learning that everything could be reduced to numbers on a spreadsheet. "Money is how we measure value in the real world. If companies aren't willing to pay good money for what you do, what does that tell you about how valuable it really is? Brad nodded sagely, as if Emma had just shared profound wisdom instead of the kind of reductive thinking that reduces human experience to quarterly earnings reports. Goldman is paying Emma what they're paying her because she's going to generate real value, he continued. She's going to be managing portfolios worth millions of dollars, making decisions that actually impact the economy. That's responsibility. That's significant. The word significant hung in the air like smoke, contrasting implicitly with whatever it was they thought I did all day. Playing with colors and fonts, making things look nice. Digital arts and crafts for adults who couldn't handle real work. I looked around the room at the faces of my relatives, some embarrassed by the confrontation, others clearly agreeing with Emma's assessment, all of them waiting to see how I would respond to being so thoroughly dismissed. I think what Emma's trying to say, my cousin David chimed in with the diplomatic tone of someone trying to diffuse tension while still taking sides, is that maybe you should think about leveraging your skills in a more traditional business context. Like, couldn't you do marketing? Or consulting? Something with more upward mobility? More upward mobility. As if I'd chosen a career path that was inherently limited. As if I was too naive to understand that I'd painted myself into a professional corner. I love what I do, I said, and immediately realized how weak it sounded. In a room full of people who'd been trained to prioritize practical considerations over passion, love was not a compelling argument. Emma's smile turned pitying. That's sweet, Alex, it really is. But love doesn't pay rent. Love doesn't build retirement accounts. And honestly, most people who say they love their job are just afraid to admit they've made poor choices. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Not just the words themselves, but the casual delivery, as if she was sharing an objective truth rather than delivering a calculated insult. I felt heat rising in my cheeks, that familiar flush of humiliation that I remembered from childhood, from school presentations gone wrong, from moments when I'd been made to feel small and foolish in front of people whose opinions mattered to me. But underneath the embarrassment was something else, something harder and more durable. Anger, yes, but also determination. The kind of quiet fury that doesn't explode outward but turns inward, becoming fuel for long-term commitment. You know what, Em? I set down my plastic cup of terrible wine on the nearest bookshelf. We'll see. See what? We'll see who's right. I walked away before she could respond, before the conversation could continue, before I could say something I'd regret or, worse, something that would give her more ammunition for her assessment of my character and judgment. In the bathroom, I stared at my reflection in the mirror above the sink. 24 years old, wearing a button-down shirt from Target and dress pants I'd bought on sale at Macy's. I looked exactly like what I was. A young professional still figuring things out, still building towards something, still hoping that the work I loved would eventually love me back in the form of financial security and professional recognition. But standing there, listening to the muffled conversation continuing in the living room, I made a decision that would shape the next 8 years of my life. I wasn't going to prove Emma wrong through arguments or explanations. I wasn't going to defend my choices or justify my passion or explain the complexity of my work to people who were determined to see it as simple. I was going to prove her wrong through results. The Monday after Emma's engagement party, I sat at my desk at TechStart Solutions and really looked at my work environment for the first time in months. The office was in a converted warehouse in Long Island City, the kind of space that startup founders choose because it's cheap and they can call it industrial chic. My desk was a piece of plywood balanced on 2 sawhorses. My chair was borrowed from the conference room, and my monitor was a 22-inch Dell that flickered whenever someone used the microwave. This was not the setting of a real job by Emma's standards. No marble lobby, no mahogany furniture, no view of Manhattan's skyline. Just 12 people in an open space, working on an app that helped small restaurants manage their delivery orders. But for the first time, I saw potential where I'd previously seen limitation. My boss, Sarah Chen, was a former Google product manager who'd left her 6-figure job to build something from scratch. She was brilliant, demanding, and completely unimpressed by traditional markers of success. What mattered to Sarah was whether you could solve problems that mattered to real people. "Alex," she said that Monday morning, appearing at my makeshift desk with 2 cups of coffee and the expression she wore when she was about to give me more work than I could reasonably handle. "I need you to redesign our entire onboarding flow." "The whole thing?" "The whole thing. Our drop-off rate after sign-up is 73%. People sign up for the app, open it once, get confused, and never come back. I need you to figure out why and fix it." In a traditional corporate environment, this would have been a project assigned to a team of researchers, designers, and analysts. At TechStart Solutions, it was just me, a laptop, and whatever creativity I could muster. I spent the next 2 weeks doing something that Emma would never have understood. I became obsessed with the psychology of restaurant owners. I called every restaurant in our system and asked if I could spend a few hours watching them work. I sat in kitchens during lunch rushes, observing how managers juggled phone orders, delivery app notifications, and in-person customers. I watched them struggle with our interface during their busiest moments, noting every point where confusion slowed them down. What I discovered was that we'd built our app for people like us tech-savvy millennials who had unlimited time to explore new software. But our users were restaurant owners working 60-hour weeks, many of whom had learned English as a second language, all of whom needed software that worked intuitively from the first interaction. I redesigned everything. The sign-up process, the main dashboard, the way orders were displayed, even the color scheme. Instead of the sleek black and white that looked sophisticated in design portfolios, I used high-contrast colors that remained visible under harsh restaurant lighting. Instead of clever animations that showed off technical skill, I created simple, clear pathways that moved users toward their goals without distraction. The new design wasn't beautiful by conventional standards. It was functional in a way that prioritized user needs over designer ego. When we launched the redesign, our drop-off rate fell from 73% to 31% in 6 weeks. Restaurant owners started calling to tell us how much easier the app had become to use. Sarah got calls from investors who wanted to know what had caused our engagement metrics to spike. "This is real impact," Sarah told me during my performance review. "You didn't just make something look better. You made it work better for the people who need it." She promoted me to senior UX designer and raised my salary to $58,000. It wasn't Goldman Sachs money, but it represented something more valuable to me: recognition that my work created measurable value for real people. That night, I called my mother to share the good news. "I'm proud of you, honey," she said. "Your father and I always knew you were talented." Did Emma ever mention what she thought about my career choice? There was a pause. Well, she did say something at her bridal shower about how nice it was that you were following your hobbies, even if they weren't practical long-term. Following my hobbies. 8 months after her engagement party, Emma was still dismissing my work as something cute, but ultimately insignificant. I hung up and opened my laptop. If TechStart Solutions had taught me anything, it was that real expertise came from solving real problems for real people. Emma could keep her opinions about practicality and significance. I was going to keep building things that worked. TechStart Solutions died on a Thursday in November 2018. I arrived at the office to find Sarah sitting in the middle of the empty space, surrounded by boxes and wearing the expression of someone who'd spent the night staring at bankruptcy documents. "We're out of runway," she said without preamble. "The Series A fell through and we've got enough cash to pay everyone through the end of the month." "I'm sorry, Alex." 18 months after Emma's assessment of my career choices, I was unemployed. The irony wasn't lost on me. While I'd been redesigning onboarding flows and obsessing over user retention metrics, Emma had been climbing the Goldman Sachs hierarchy. Her LinkedIn updates showed a steady progression: analyst to associate, client presentations to international deals, salary increases that probably doubled her income every 2 years. Meanwhile, I was back to scanning job boards and updating my resume, trying to explain why my last company had failed without making it sound like personal failure. But something had changed in those 18 months at TechStart Solutions. I'd learned to see failure differently. When our onboarding redesign didn't work the first time, when our drop-off rate actually increased for 2 weeks after launch, I hadn't seen it as evidence that Emma was right about my career choice. I'd seen it as data that needed interpretation. I'd talked to more users, analyzed more behavior patterns, and iterated on the design until it worked. Failure, I'd learned, was just another word for incomplete information. So when TechStart Solutions closed, I didn't see it as proof that startups were risky or that I should have chosen a more stable career path. I saw it as education in how businesses worked, why they failed, and what I could learn from being part of one that had tried ambitious things and fallen short. I also saw an opportunity. During my job search, I started freelancing. Small projects at first, redesigning websites for local businesses, creating mobile interfaces for other early-stage startups. The pay was inconsistent and the work was stressful, but I was building something Emma could never understand: a reputation based on results. My first major freelance client was a fintech startup called PayEase, founded by two former Wall Street analysts who wanted to democratize investment tools for small business owners. They needed someone to design an interface that could make complex financial concepts accessible to users who weren't finance professionals. It was exactly the kind of challenge that drew me to UX design in the first place, taking something complicated and making it simple without making it simplistic. I spent 3 months working nights and weekends on their platform, conducting user interviews with small business owners, testing prototypes with people who had never used investment software, iterating on designs until we found interfaces that felt intuitive, even for complex financial operations. The app launched in March 2019 and was featured in TechCrunch within 2 weeks. PayEase raised a $2.3 million seed round 6 months later, and the investors specifically mentioned the user experience as a differentiating factor. "You didn't just design an app," one of the founders told me. "You designed a way for people to feel confident about making financial decisions they'd never made before. That's not design, that's empowerment." By the end of 2019, I was making more money freelancing than I'd ever made as a full-time employee. More importantly, I was working on projects that mattered to me, with clients who valued my strategic thinking as much as my design skills. Emma, meanwhile, had gotten engaged again, this time to a private equity associate she'd met at a networking event. Her social media showed a lifestyle that looked straight out of a luxury magazine. Weekend trips to the Hamptons, dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, vacation photos from places I'd only seen in travel documentaries. She was winning the game by every metric she'd established at that engagement party in 2017. Higher salary, better title, more prestigious company, more expensive lifestyle. But I was learning to play a different game entirely. In January 2020, I got a call from Marcus Rodriguez, the CTO of Streamline HR, a mid-size human resources software company based in Manhattan. "I've been following your work," he said. "The PayEase interface, the restaurant app from your startup, some of the freelance projects I've seen in your portfolio. You understand something that most designers don't." "What's that?" "You understand that design isn't just about making things look good. You understand that it's about making complex systems accessible to people who don't have time to figure them out." Streamline HR managed payroll and benefits for companies with 50 to 500 employees, the kind of mid-market businesses that needed sophisticated HR tools but couldn't afford dedicated IT staff to manage them. Their software worked, but it was designed by engineers for engineers. Clients were constantly calling support for help with basic functions. "We need someone who can redesign our entire platform with real users in mind," Marcus said. "Not just the interface, but the whole user experience. Information architecture, workflow optimization, onboarding, everything." It was the kind of comprehensive UX overhaul that most companies assign to consulting firms with teams of dozen specialists. Streamline HR wanted to hire me to do it alone, as their first dedicated UX designer. The offer was $78,000 plus equity, which was more money than I'd ever made in a traditional job. But more than the salary, it was the scope of responsibility that excited me. I wouldn't just be designing interfaces, I'd be architecting how thousands of people interacted with software that managed some of the most important aspects of their professional lives. I accepted immediately. The next 2 years at Streamline HR were my graduate education in user experience design. I learned to think beyond individual screens and consider entire user journeys. I learned to balance the needs of different user types: HR managers who needed comprehensive data, employees who needed simple self-service, executives who needed high-level insights. I learned to measure success not just in engagement metrics, but in reduced support calls, faster task completion, and user satisfaction surveys. Most importantly, I learned to speak business language. In my previous roles, I'd focused primarily on user needs and design aesthetics. At Streamline HR, I learned to translate those considerations into business terms that executives could understand. Instead of talking about improved user experience, I talked about reduced customer support costs. Instead of discussing intuitive navigation, I presented data on increased user productivity and faster onboarding times. By 2021, I was leading user research initiatives that involved surveys of thousands of users, A/B tests that ran for months, and data analysis that informed product strategy decisions. I was presenting to the executive team monthly, explaining how design decisions impacted customer retention and revenue growth. The platform redesign I led resulted in a 47% reduction in support tickets, a 34% increase in user engagement, and customer satisfaction scores that jumped from 6.2 to 8, 4 out of 10. Streamline HR used these metrics to raise a $15 million Series B round, with investors specifically citing the improved user experience as evidence of the company's market differentiation. Marcus promoted me to senior UX designer and then, 6 months later, to lead product designer. My salary increased to $95,000, then $110,000. But more than the money, it was the recognition that mattered. I was no longer someone who made things look pretty. I was someone who understood how design decisions impacted business outcomes. In September 2021, I got a LinkedIn message from a recruiter at TechFlow Solutions. "We're looking for a director of user experience for our financial software division," the message read. "Your background in fintech and enterprise software makes you a perfect candidate. Are you interested in discussing a role that would put you in charge of UX strategy for products used by millions of financial professionals?" The salary range was $140,000 to $180,000, plus equity in a company that was preparing for an IPO. I was 28 years old, and I was being recruited for director-level positions at companies that managed billions of dollars in financial transactions. Emma, according to her LinkedIn, had been promoted to vice president at Goldman Sachs. Her salary was probably in the same range as the TechFlow offer, maybe higher. But she was managing investment portfolios. I was being asked to manage user experiences that would affect how millions of people interacted with financial technology. 4 years after she'd dismissed my career as playing with computers, I was being recruited to senior positions based on expertise she couldn't have understood if I'd explained it to her for hours. I scheduled an interview with TechFlow Solutions. TechFlow Solutions occupied 4 floors of a glass tower in Midtown Manhattan. The lobby had the kind of understated elegance that costs more than ostentation marble that looked like it had been quarried yesterday. Lighting that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Furniture that probably cost more than my first car. This was Emma's world. The world of serious money, important decisions, and people whose work affected global markets. I was there for a final interview with Janet Morrison, TechFlow's Chief Product Officer, for the Director of User Experience position. "Your background is unusual," Janet said, reviewing my portfolio on her tablet. "Most UX directors come from larger companies, more traditional paths. You've built your expertise at startups and mid-market firms." "That's true," I said. "But I think it's given me perspective that might be valuable here. I understand what it's like to work with limited resources, to have to prove ROI for every design decision, to build user experiences that need to work immediately because there's no budget for extended user education." Janet looked up from the tablet. "Tell me about the Streamline HR project. How did you measure the business impact of your design changes?" For the next 20 minutes, I walked her through the data. Not just the user satisfaction scores and engagement metrics, but the financial impact. The reduced support costs, the improved customer retention, the way better user experience had become a competitive differentiator that helped close enterprise deals. "You think like a business leader who happens to specialize in user experience," Janet said. "Most designers think like designers who have to justify their work to business leaders. That's a crucial difference. She offered me the position that afternoon. 175,000 base salary, plus performance bonuses that could add another 30,000 annually, plus equity that would vest over 4 years. I would manage a team of 12 UX designers and researchers, overseeing user experience for financial software used by banks, investment firms, and trading platforms across North America and Europe. At 29, I would be responsible for design decisions that affected how millions of financial professionals did their jobs every day. I accepted the offer and started at TechFlow in January 2022. The first year was overwhelming in the best possible way. I was learning to manage not just projects but people, not just user experiences but team dynamics and strategic planning. I was presenting to executives who managed billion-dollar product lines, working with engineering teams spread across 3 continents, making decisions that would impact software used by some of the largest financial institutions in the world. But I was also learning something else: how to see the bigger picture. At Streamline HR, I'd focused on making HR software easier to use. At TechFlow, I was working on systems that helped financial professionals make better decisions with other people's money. The user experience work I was doing had direct impact on how efficiently capital markets functioned, how quickly trades were executed, how accurately risk was assessed. Emma had been right about one thing. Finance was important work that affected the real economy. But what she hadn't understood was that technology was becoming inseparable from finance, and user experience was becoming inseparable from technology. The trading platforms I was redesigning would be used by the same kinds of analysts Emma worked with at Goldman Sachs. The portfolio management tools my team was building would help people like her make better investment decisions. The risk assessment interfaces we were developing would give financial professionals like her access to better data, presented in more intuitive ways. I wasn't competing with Emma's career path. I was building the tools that made her career path possible. In December 2022, Janet called me into her office. "We're spinning off our retail trading platform into a separate product line," she said. "It's going to be a major growth area for us, and we need someone to lead the entire user experience strategy. Not just design, but user research, information architecture, product strategy, everything related to how customers interact with our software." The promotion came with a new title, Senior Director of User Experience, and a salary increase to $195,000 plus bonuses. I would be managing a team of 18 people and working directly with the executive team to define product strategy. I was 30 years old, making more money than I'd ever imagined when Emma dismissed my career as playing with computers and working on products that would directly compete with the trading platforms used by firms like Goldman Sachs. But the most satisfying part wasn't the money or the title. It was the expertise. I had become genuinely expert at something that mattered. I could walk into a room of executives and explain how user experience decisions would impact business outcomes, support my arguments with data, and be trusted to make strategic decisions that affected millions of users and billions of dollars in transactions. Emma had achieved success by excelling within an existing system. I had achieved success by understanding and improving the systems themselves. The email from HR arrived on a Tuesday morning in October 2024. "Alex, we need to expand the UX team for our new retail trading platform. The user base is growing faster than we anticipated, and we need additional senior-level designers who understand financial software. I've reviewed about 30 candidates and identified 5 strong potentials. Can you review their portfolios and conduct final interviews?" I was drinking coffee from a mug that said, "World's Most Adequate Boss," a gift from my team after I'd used that phrase to describe my management style in a meeting. My office had a view of the Hudson River and walls covered with user journey maps, research findings, and prototypes from our latest projects. 7.5 years after Emma's engagement party, I was sitting in a corner office in Manhattan, managing an 18-person team, working on products that would be used by millions of financial professionals, making decisions that would impact how efficiently capital markets functioned. I opened the first portfolio attachment without looking at the name. The work was competent. Not great, not terrible, but solidly adequate. The kind of portfolio that showed someone had learned UX design methodologies without necessarily understanding the strategic thinking behind them. Clean wireframes, properly formatted case studies, All the right terminology used in mostly the right contexts. But there was something about it that felt familiar. A certain approach to problem solving that prioritized best practices over deep user understanding. A way of presenting design decisions that emphasized process over outcomes. I scrolled down to the resume. Emma Richardson. I stared at the screen for what felt like a full minute, reading and rereading the name as if it might change if I looked at it differently. Emma Richardson, UX designer, previously product strategy consultant at various startups. Education, MBA, Wharton School of Business. Career transition to user experience design, 2023. Her LinkedIn profile told the story in corporate euphemisms. Goldman Sachs, 2017-2023. Vice President, Investment Banking Division, decided to pursue opportunities in the growing field of user experience design. Career pivot enabled by extensive business background and strategic thinking skills. What it didn't say, but what I could read between the lines, was that Emma had left Goldman Sachs during the layoffs that had swept through investment banking in late 2022 and early 2023. Her decision to pursue UX design had probably been motivated by necessity rather than passion. She had spent 6 years building expertise in finance, reaching a senior level at one of the most prestigious firms in the world, only to find herself starting over in a field she'd once dismissed as playing with computers. The portfolio showed evidence of bootcamp training. The kind of intensive 3-month programs that promised to transform career changers into UX designers. She'd learned the vocabulary, understood the basic methodologies, and completed projects that demonstrated competence without revealing any particular insight or creativity. It was exactly the kind of portfolio I saw from dozens of career changers. Professionally adequate, but lacking the depth of understanding that came from years of solving real problems for real users. I could have rejected her application immediately. Should have, probably. We needed senior-level designers who could contribute strategic thinking from day one, not junior-level candidates who would need months of mentoring to understand the complexity of financial software design. But instead, I scheduled her for an interview. Thursday, 2 p.m. She walked into conference room B wearing a navy blue blazer and the kind of confident smile that had probably served her well in investment banking, but felt oddly out of place in a UX design interview. For just a moment standing in the doorway, she looked exactly like she had at that engagement party 7 years ago, polished, successful, in control of the room. Then she saw me sitting at the head of the conference table. The smile flickered like a light bulb with loose wiring. Her eyes widened slightly, and I watched her brain try to process information that didn't fit her expectations. Alex? The word came out smaller than she probably intended, with a note of uncertainty that I'd never heard in her voice before. Hello, Emma. Please have a seat. She hesitated for just a moment, then walked to the chair across from me. I noticed she was carrying a leather portfolio that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary old habits from her finance days. Perhaps, or armor to make her feel more confident in unfamiliar territory. Wow. What a small world. She was trying to recover her composure, to find solid ground in a situation that had suddenly shifted beneath her feet. I had no idea you worked here. This is such a... Let's talk about your portfolio, I interrupted gently, opening her PDF on my laptop. I kept my voice professional, neutral, the tone I used with every candidate. Walk me through your approach to user research. The question was intentionally broad, designed to let candidates demonstrate both their knowledge and their thinking process. Strong candidates used it as an opportunity to discuss methodology, share specific examples, and reveal how they balanced user needs with business constraints. Weak candidates stumbled through textbook answers they'd memorized from online courses. Emma's answer fell somewhere between the two, but closer to the weak side. Well, user research is obviously crucial to the UX design process, she began, using the slightly formal tone she'd probably developed during client presentations at Goldman Sachs. My approach typically involves conducting stakeholder interviews to understand business requirements, followed by user interviews to identify pain points and opportunities for improvement. It was a perfectly adequate answer that revealed nothing about her actual experience or understanding. She was reciting steps she'd learned rather than describing work she'd done. Can you give me a specific example? I asked. Tell me about a research project you've led, what methods you used, and how the findings influenced your design decisions. This was where the difference between genuine experience and boot camp training became apparent. Emma launched into a description of a case study that I recognized from her portfolio. A redesign of an e-commerce checkout flow that hit all the right notes without demonstrating any particular insight. She talked about user personas and journey mapping, about pain points and user needs, but there was something rehearsed about it, as if she was presenting a project she'd heard about rather than one she'd actually executed. What was your sample size for the user interviews? I asked. We interviewed 12 users, she said, with just enough hesitation to suggest she was remembering rather than recalling. How did you recruit them? Another pause. Through our existing user base and some social media outreach. These weren't the answers of someone who had actually conducted user research. They were the answers of someone who had read about user research and was trying to sound knowledgeable. I spent the next 20 minutes walking her through the kind of detailed questions I asked every candidate. How do you balance user needs with business constraints? How do you measure the success of a design intervention? How do you handle conflicting feedback from different stakeholders? Emma's answers revealed the fundamental challenge of career pivots. She had business vocabulary from her finance background and design vocabulary from her bootcamp training, but she lacked the bridging expertise that came from actually applying design thinking to complex business problems. She understood that user research was important, but she couldn't explain how to use research findings to make strategic product decisions. She knew that user experience affected business outcomes, but she couldn't describe the metrics that would demonstrate that impact. She had learned the language of UX design without developing fluency in the underlying thinking. Emma, I said, closing my laptop and leaning back in my chair, can I give you some honest feedback? She nodded eagerly, probably hoping for encouragement or constructive suggestions for improvement. Your portfolio shows that you've learned UX design methodologies, and your business background obviously gives you valuable perspective on strategic thinking. But this role requires someone who can lead research initiatives for financial software used by professional traders and investment analysts. It requires deep understanding of how user experience decisions impact business outcomes in highly regulated, high-stakes environments. I paused, watching her face as she began to understand where this was heading. The level of expertise we need isn't just about knowing the right process or using the right terminology. It's about understanding user psychology well enough to predict how design changes will affect behavior, understanding business strategy well enough to prioritize features based on ROI, and understanding financial software well enough to design interfaces that help users make better decisions with other people's money. Her face was flushed now, the same way mine had been at that engagement party when she'd dismissed my career choice as playing with computers. I think you have potential, I continued, but you're not ready for this level of responsibility yet. You need more hands-on experience with real users, real products, and real business impact. That's not a criticism of your abilities, it's just the reality of where you are in your UX design journey. She was quiet for a moment, staring at her hands. When she looked up, there was something in her expression I'd never seen before. Vulnerability. How long do you think it would take, she asked, to get to that level? Honestly, 2 to 3 years of focused work, maybe longer. UX design isn't just about learning tools and processes. It's about developing intuition for human behavior and business strategy that comes from solving real problems for real users over and over again. I stood up, signaling that the interview was ending. I'd encourage you to look for junior or mid-level positions where you can build that experience. There are some excellent companies that specialize in training career changers. Get some real projects under your belt, work with actual users, learn to measure the business impact of your design decisions. Then maybe we can talk again in a few years. She gathered her expensive portfolio with hands that were shaking slightly. At the door, she turned back. Alex, I owe you an apology. I waited. What I said at the engagement party, about your job not being real work, about getting a real career. I was wrong. I didn't understand what you were doing, and I was being cruel. I nodded. Thank you for saying that. Are we? Are we okay? The question hung in the air between us, carrying the weight of 7 years and 2 completely different life trajectories. I thought about the young man who had walked away from that engagement party humiliated and angry, who had channeled that humiliation into fuel for professional growth. I thought about the woman standing in front of me now, who had achieved everything she thought she wanted only to find herself starting over in a field she'd once dismissed. We're okay, Emma. We're just not the same people we were 7 years ago. She smiled. A real smile this time, not the practiced one she'd worn in the conference room. No, we're definitely not. After she left, I sat alone in the conference room for a few minutes, looking out at the Manhattan skyline through floor-to-ceiling windows. The city looked different from this height, more manageable somehow, as if all the complexity and chaos below could be understood and organized from the right perspective. I thought about calling her back, about offering her a junior position, about being generous in victory. But that would have been condescending, and Emma didn't need my charity. She needed what I had needed 7 years ago, the motivation to prove herself through her own work, in her own time, on her own terms. My phone buzzed with a text from Sarah Chen, my former boss from TechStart Solutions, who had gone on to found another startup. Heard through the grapevine that you're killing it at TechFlow. Proud of you, Alex. Remember when you were redesigning onboarding flows on a plywood desk? I smiled and typed back, best education I ever got. And it was true. The path from that makeshift desk in Long Island City to this corner office in Manhattan hadn't been the path Emma would have chosen for me, but it had been exactly the path I needed to take. Every failure, every small victory, every moment of doubt had built the expertise that made me valuable to companies like TechFlow. 2 weeks after Emma's interview, I was presenting quarterly UX metrics to the executive team when Janet Morrison mentioned something that made me pause. Our trading platform user satisfaction scores have increased from 7, 2 to 8, 6 over the past 18 months, she said, clicking through slides that showed steady improvement across every metric we tracked. Alex, can you talk about what's driving that improvement? I stood up and walked to the presentation screen, feeling the familiar confidence that came from discussing work I understood deeply. It comes down to understanding our users' actual workflows rather than making assumptions about them, I said. When I started at TechFlow, our platform was designed by people who understood financial markets but didn't understand how traders actually process information under pressure. I clicked to the next slide, which showed heat maps of eye-tracking studies we'd conducted with professional traders. We discovered that during high-volume trading periods, users were missing critical information because it was presented in ways that made sense during calm market conditions but became overwhelming during volatility. So we redesigned the entire information hierarchy to prioritize the data that matters most when decisions need to be made in seconds. CFO Michael Chen leaned forward. What's the business impact of that satisfaction increase? Customer retention is up 34% year over year. Support tickets are down 47%. But more importantly, our enterprise clients are reporting measurably better trading outcomes when using our platform compared to competitors. That's becoming a key differentiator in new client acquisitions. After the meeting, Janet pulled me aside. I've been thinking about your role here, she said. You're doing director-level work, but your impact is at the VP level. We're creating a new position, VP of User Experience, and I want you to consider it. Vice President. At 31 years old, I was being offered an executive position that would put me in charge of user experience strategy for a company that processed billions of dollars in financial transactions daily. The salary would be $275,000 plus equity and bonuses that could push my total compensation over $400,000 in a good year. But more than the money, it was the recognition of something Emma had never understood. Expertise had its own trajectory, separate from traditional corporate hierarchies. I accepted the promotion. That evening, I called my parents to share the news. Vice President, my father repeated, his voice carrying the kind of pride that comes from watching someone exceed your highest expectations. At 31, your mother and I are so proud of you, Alex. Thanks, Dad. It still feels surreal. You know, he said, your cousin Emma called your aunt last week. Apparently, she's looking for work in. What was it, honey? I heard my mother's voice in the background. User experience design. That's right, my father continued. Seems like she's changing careers. Your aunt mentioned something about her realizing how important technology work has become. Funny how things change, isn't it? Funny wasn't the word I would have used, but I understood what he meant. 7 years ago, Emma had dismissed my career as playing with computers. Now she was trying to enter the field I'd spent those 7 years mastering. Did she mention anything specific about her job search? I asked. Just that it's harder than she expected to break into technology. Apparently, companies want people with more hands-on experience. After I hung up, I opened LinkedIn and searched for Emma's profile. She had updated it since our interview, adding more details about her UX design training and emphasizing her business background. She was actively posting about design thinking and user research, sharing articles about career transitions, trying to build credibility in a field where she was still a beginner. Her most recent post was about the challenges of changing careers. Learning that expertise can't be rushed. Grateful for every opportunity to grow and prove myself in the UX design field. Looking for companies that value diverse backgrounds and are willing to invest in developing talent. There was something humble about it that I'd never seen in Emma before. The confidence that had defined her personality had been tempered by the reality of starting over in a competitive field where her previous achievements carried little weight. I could have reached out, could have offered advice or connections. But Emma needed to find her own path, just as I had needed to find mine 7 years ago, when she'd questioned everything I thought I knew about my career. 6 months into my role as VP of User Experience, TechFlow announced its IPO. The company went public at $42 per share and closed the first day of trading at $67. My equity, which had been accumulating over 3 years at the company, was suddenly worth $8 million. At 31 years old, I had achieved financial security beyond anything I'd imagined when I was sitting at that plywood desk in Long Island City, beyond anything Emma could have predicted when she'd dismissed my career as insufficiently practical. But the money, satisfying as it was, felt less significant than something else that happened that week. Harvard Business School invited me to give a guest lecture on user experience as business strategy for their MBA program. The same kind of program Emma had completed at Wharton. The same kind of education that had given her the confidence to dismiss my work as unimportant. Standing in front of 80 MBA students, explaining how user experience decisions affected market outcomes, I realized that the conversation had shifted fundamentally since 2017. These students weren't asking whether technology work was real. They were asking how they could break into technology fields, how they could develop expertise in areas that would matter in an increasingly digital economy. The most successful businesses of the next decade will be the ones that understand technology not as a support function, but as a core competency, I told them. And user experience isn't just about making software easier to use. It's about understanding human behavior well enough to predict market responses to product decisions. After the lecture, several students approached me with questions about transitioning from traditional business roles to technology careers. One of them, a second-year student who looked remarkably like Emma, had at 25, asked, "Do you think it's too late for someone with a finance background to break into UX design?" "It's never too late," I said, "but it's also never as easy as people expect. The most important thing is understanding that expertise takes time to develop. You can learn tools and methodologies quickly, but developing the intuition for human behavior and business strategy that makes you valuable, that takes years of real experience solving real problems." She nodded thoughtfully. "How long do you think it would take?" "Depends on how much you're willing to start over and really learn. Maybe 3 to 5 years to become genuinely competent. Maybe longer to become expert enough that companies seek you out for strategic roles." It was almost exactly what I'd told Emma 6 months earlier. A year later, I was invited to speak at a UX design conference in San Francisco. The topic was From Startup to IPO, How User Experience Drives Business Value, and my talk was scheduled for the main stage in front of 1,200 designers, researchers, and product managers. I was backstage, reviewing my slides one final time when I saw a familiar name in the conference program. Emma Richardson was listed as a panelist for a breakout session called Career Changers in UX, Leveraging Non-Traditional Backgrounds. According to her bio, she was now a UX designer at a mid-sized startup in Boston, working on financial software for small business owners. After my keynote, I found her in the hallway outside the breakout session rooms. She looked different, less polished than she had during our interview, more relaxed. She was wearing jeans and a simple blouse, the kind of practical outfit that prioritized comfort over impression-making. "Alex," she said, approaching with a smile that seemed genuinely pleased rather than professionally obligated. "I saw your name on the main stage. Congratulations. That's incredible." "Thanks, I saw you're speaking too. How's the new role going?" "It's good. Really good, actually. I'm learning a lot." She paused, seeming to consider whether to say more. "I wanted to thank you, actually, for the interview feedback you gave me last year." "Oh? You were right about everything. I wasn't ready for senior-level work, and I was approaching UX design like it was just another business skill I could master quickly. I needed to actually understand users and learn to solve real problems." She pulled out her phone and showed me a screenshot from her company's App Store reviews. "This is from last month. We redesigned our small business loan application process, and our approval rates increased by 22% because we made it easier for applicants to provide the information lenders actually need." I looked at the reviews, genuine praise from small business owners who described the application as intuitive and finely designed for real people. It was the kind of user feedback that indicated real impact, real understanding of user needs. "That's excellent work," I said, and meant it. "I'm still learning, but I'm finally starting to understand what you were talking about. About developing intuition for human behavior, about measuring business impact, about the complexity of designing for real users with real needs." We talked for a few more minutes about her work, about the conference, about the evolution of UX design as a field. There was something different about Emma, now less certainty, more curiosity. The humility that had been absent during our interview had been replaced by genuine engagement with learning. "Can I ask you something?" she said as we prepared to go to our respective sessions. "Sure. Do you ever think about that engagement party? About what I said about your career?" I considered the question. "Sometimes, but not the way you might think." "What do you mean?" "I used to think about it as motivation, as something to prove wrong. But now I think about it differently. You weren't wrong to value financial security and career stability. You were just wrong about what kinds of work could provide those things." She nodded slowly. "I spent so many years thinking that prestige and salary were the measures of whether work mattered. I never understood that expertise itself could be valuable, regardless of the field." "It took me a while to understand that too," I said, "but that's what the last 7 years taught me. That building genuine expertise in anything meaningful will eventually be rewarded, even if the path isn't obvious at the beginning." We shook hands before going to our respective sessions, and there was something final about the gesture. Not because we were ending anything, but because we were both acknowledging that we had become different people than we'd been at that engagement party in 2017. 2 years later, I received a LinkedIn notification that Emma had been promoted to senior UX designer at her company. Her post about the promotion was characteristically thoughtful. 3 years ago, I was a complete beginner in UX design. Today, I'm leading research initiatives that directly impact how small businesses access capital. Grateful for every mentor, user interview, and failed prototype that taught me something new. I liked the post and sent her a brief congratulations message. She responded with thanks and an update. Her team's work had contributed to their company's $50 million Series B funding round, with investors specifically citing their user experience as a competitive advantage. Emma had found her path in the field she'd once dismissed, building genuine expertise through patient work and real impact. It wasn't the path she'd planned, but it was the path she'd needed. As for me, I left TechFlow Solutions 6 months later to co-found my own company, a UX research firm that helps financial technology startups build products that actually serve their users' needs. We're small, profitable, and working on problems that matter to real people. Sometimes I think about that engagement party, about the young man who walked away humiliated and angry, about the promise I made to myself in that bathroom mirror. But mostly, I think about the work I'm doing now, about the users whose lives are improved by better design, about the entrepreneurs who build better businesses because they understand their customers more deeply. The vindication I thought I wanted was a moment of triumph, a clear victory that would prove Emma wrong and validate my choices. What I got instead was something more valuable: a career built on expertise, work that creates genuine value for real people, and the confidence that comes from knowing you've become genuinely good at something that matters. Emma was right about one thing at that engagement party in 2017. Success is about creating real value in the real world. She just didn't understand that technology and the human expertise required to make it work for people had become inseparable from that equation. The best revenge, it turns out, isn't a moment of dramatic payback. It's building a life so aligned with your values and talents that you forget you ever wanted revenge at all. Though I'll admit, signing my name as CEO on that first client contract did feel pretty satisfying.